Texas, 1944. The afternoon sun bakes the wire fences of Camp Hearn until they shimmer like liquid glass. Inside the mess tent, a group of German officers sit around a wooden table, the air thick with dust and arrogance. A small radio crackles to life, carrying President Roosevelt's voice across the static. "We fight for democracy." It says firm, measured, almost tender. One general, his uniform still bearing faint traces of Africa's desert sand, smirks and leans back. "Democracy," he says, loud enough for the guards outside to hear. "A system where soldiers vote on orders." Laughter erupts, sharp, dismissive, triumphant. The laughter of men who still believe themselves superior even behind barbed wire. Across the fence, a few American guards glance over. One, barely 20, leans on his rifle and answers quietly. "We don't vote on orders," he says. "We vote on what kind of world comes next." The laughter fades, for the first time. The camp falls silent enough for the cicadas to take over. If you value stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps preserve forgotten chapters of history. Tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there. History connects all of us, no matter the hour. That night, as the camp generator hums and moths orbit the light bulbs, a few Germans sit awake. They whisper about the guard's answer. One scoffs, another shrugs, but Colonel Reinhardt, the eldest among them, writes in his diary, "They believe their freedom makes them strong." Perhaps it does. The diary will be found decades later, its pages yellowed, but words intact, the first faint crack in a wall of contempt. For now, the fence still stands, separating victors from vanquished. But the echo of that conversation, one mocking question, one quiet reply, begins to move unseen through the camp, through the night, through history itself. A seed has been planted, and democracy, once dismissed as weakness, has begun its silent work. The winter of 1944 turns the Texas plains into sheets of pale frost. Within the barbed wire compound of Camp Hearn, the German commanders begin to observe their captors more closely. They had expected chaos, yet what they find is order built from consent, not fear. When the bell rings for work detail, no officer shouts. Men rise because it is time, not because a whip commands them. That small detail unsettles the Germans far more than any lecture on liberty. Outside the camp, they see a different army moving. Farmers abandon their fields to enlist. Women in bandanas and denim overalls take their place in tractor seats. In the evenings, the air hums with the rhythm of welding torches from a distant factory, their glow like fireflies scattered across the horizon. Freedom, it seems, has found a way to mobilize itself. Lieutenant Huber, once an aide to Field Marshal Rommel, watches a convoy of trucks rumble by carrying steel beams. Each one is driven by a woman. They send their mothers to war. He murmurs, his guard, an Iowa farm boy named Ellis, replies simply, "They volunteered. We all do." Huber later notes in his journal, "This democracy fights not because it is ordered to, but because it believes." Archival records confirm the scale of that belief. In 1944 alone, 19 million Americans worked directly in war production. Over 6 million were women. Rural schools turned into training centers for mechanics. Church basements became first aid classes. Factories ran 24 hours without military police standing guard because no one needed to be forced to stay. The German prisoners begin to argue among themselves. Some insist it is propaganda. Others suspect it is real. Colonel Reinhardt writes to his wife through the Red Cross. "They say this country has no discipline, but I have seen a discipline deeper than fear, one born of conviction." His letter is censored by both sides, yet its copy survives in an archive in Stuttgart, day by day. The arrogance fades like rust under sunlight. The Germans start noticing details they once ignored: a black worker eating lunch beside a white one, a union leader shaking hands with a plant manager. They do not understand it, but they feel its strength. This is a world where voices, not salutes, drive the engine, and that realization, though silent, begins to weigh more than any chain. One evening, as the American anthem drifts faintly from a nearby radio, a German officer looks toward the fence and whispers, "Perhaps obedience is not the only form of loyalty." No one answers him, but no one laughs anymore either. Spring 1945. The air inside the Texas camp feels different now, heavier, yet expectant. Rumors ripple through the barracks like wind through dry grass. Berlin has fallen. The Reich, once imagined eternal, has collapsed into silence. In a dimly lit hut, a group of German commanders sit around a table strewn with newspapers and radio bulletins. Colonel Reinhardt, whose beard has turned gray in captivity, reads the latest dispatch aloud. His voice trembles at the final line, "Hitler is dead. Germany has surrendered." No one speaks. The moment stretches until one of them, General von Kleist, mutters bitterly. The Führer promised 1,000 years. It ended in 12. The others stare at the wooden floor. Outside, a radio hums again this time. A calm American broadcast from Washington. Democracy, the voice says, does not promise forever. It earns tomorrow. The irony pierces deeper than defeat itself. For men raised to believe in destiny, the idea that survival depends on daily renewal feels unbearable and yet strangely liberating. That night, Sergeant Ellis, the same guard who once traded barbs with them, brings powdered milk and canned peaches into the hut. "You'll need this," he says softly. Von Kleist sneers. Charity for the conquered. Ellis shakes his head. No. Breakfast, the exchange, small and wordless, becomes an act heavier than mercy. In the days that follow, prisoners receive newspapers showing the ruins of their homeland. Dresden flattened, Hamburg burnt to ash, millions displaced. Reinhardt keeps reading, then stops. He writes in his diary, "We lost not to America's army, but to its belief that tomorrow can always be built again." The camp begins to change tone. Guards lend books. Jefferson, Lincoln, Whitman, one German officer, fluent in English, translates passages aloud at night, his voice trembling as he reads about a government of the people, by the people, for the people. A few laugh awkwardly, others listen, haunted. Official statistics reflect the scale of the world they no longer command. By 1945, America had produced 297,000 aircraft, 86,000 tanks, and 6,500 naval vessels, not by decree, but by cooperation. Democracy had proven itself the most efficient war machine ever built, precisely because it was not won. As summer nears, the camp choir sings for the first time not military hymns, but folk songs carried from both sides of the ocean. For a moment, barbed wire feels like a suggestion rather than a sentence. The German officers, who once mocked the idea of freedom, now hear its echo in their own voices, fragile, unsure, but real. Berlin has fallen, but in Texas, something new is rising, not in victory, but in understanding. The war is over, but for the prisoners of war. Time continues in slow, steady loops. Trucks come and go from the camp, dust rising over the endless Texas plain. Some prisoners are transferred north to work programs logging in Wisconsin, harvesting sugar beets in Minnesota, repairing rail lines through the Dakotas. To their surprise, they are paid small wages, treated not as enemies, but as laborers. They cannot understand it. They are men who once marched under banners demanding conquest. Now, they are fed, sheltered, and even trusted by those they once called weak. In the camp kitchens, the first shipments from Europe arrive under the banner of the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration. Boxes stamped, "Gift of the American People," are unloaded by German hands. One crate bursts open, spilling flour and dried milk. A soldier kneels, reading the English labels, puzzled. "UNRWA. What is that?" an American replies. "It's food for Europe. Yours too." The following morning, while a convoy of supply trucks passes the camp gate, a German officer named Captain Albrecht asks his guard, "Why feed us?" "We destroyed your friends." The guard shrugs, lifting a sack of grain onto the truck, because democracy doesn't starve the defeated. That single answer passes through the camp faster than any rumor. It is repeated in mess halls, in letters home, even whispered during lights out, not as a slogan, but as something almost sacred. Historical records confirm the magnitude of that compassion. By late 1946, the United States had shipped more than 16 million tons of food aid to a ruined Europe, much of it to Germany. Even while rationing continued at home, Americans sent milk powder, bread flour, and canned meat across the Atlantic. For the German officers, this act of generosity strikes harder than any defeat. General von Kleist, who once commanded entire divisions, watches through the fence as trucks roll toward the port. Our empire fed on conquest. He murmurs, "Theirs feeds the conquered." His hand trembles slightly as he writes the line in his notebook. At sunset, the camp chapel glows with amber light. A few prisoners sit inside, heads bowed, not praying for victory, but for comprehension. They begin to see democracy not as an abstract word, but as something tangible, the loaf of bread passed across a fence. The choice to forgive when vengeance would be easier. The same wind that once carried laughter now carries the scent of fresh bread from the camp kitchen for the first time. The officers realize that freedom's power is not loud, not boastful, not armed, but persistent, patient, and profoundly human. By 1947, Europe lies in ruins, from the Atlantic to the Oder. Cities are silent skeletons of glass and steel. In Germany, trains crawl past landscapes of chimneys without roofs. Children play among the rubble with shell casings as toys. And then, suddenly, ships begin to arrive not with soldiers, but with grain, engines, and hope. The Germans, who once scoffed at American sentimentality, now watch with disbelief as cargo after cargo unloads at Bremen and Marseille. Every burlap sack bears the same bold letters USA. It is the Marshall Plan, a name that sounds like a miracle whispered through the ruins. The total value, $13 billion, is more than the entire annual output of France and West Germany combined. It is not a gesture of mercy, but a blueprint for resurrection. In a small village near Frankfurt, Colonel Reinhardt, now released and gaunt from captivity, sees an American engineer supervising bridge repairs. He hesitates, then salutes not as a soldier, but as a man acknowledging another builder. "The enemy rebuilds us," he murmurs, his old comrade. Now, a factory foreman answers, "No, a free man helps because he can." Newspapers print photos of wheat shipments, tractors arriving at ports, classrooms reopening. Democracy, the system they once ridiculed as weak and indecisive, is reconstructing a continent through cooperation within 3 years. Industrial production in Western Europe rises by 35%. Power grids return to life. Cafes reopen. Trains whistle again across borders that once burned. One of the former POWs, Captain Albrecht, writes a letter to his wife from Hamburg. America fights differently. Its victory continues even after peace. They rebuild not to rule, but to prevent despair. I used to think mercy was cowardice. Now I see it as their strength. That letter, preserved in a German archive, becomes one of thousands written by men who discovered that defeat could teach what triumph never did. Across radio broadcasts, European commentators begin using a new phrase, the democratic miracle. It is not propaganda. It is the sight of warehouses filled with food, schools filled with light, and children who have never known hunger smiling beneath American flags stitched from surplus cloth. What astonishes the former German commanders most is that no one forces this generosity. No Reich decree, no supreme leader, no propaganda ministry, just policy, debate, and faith in the future. Democracy's strength lies not in obedience, but in renewal. Viewers, pause for a second. What would Europe have become without this plan? Without a nation choosing rebuilding over revenge, would the cycle of hatred have ended, or would the ruins have learned only to hate again? The year is 1949. Germany stands between ashes and rebirth in a military detention center near Nuremberg. A final group of senior officers wait for release. Once, their words commanded battalions. Now, they write memoirs on government-issued paper, their pens trembling between confession and justification. Among them is General von Kleist in his quarters. He stares at a stack of letters, the ones he never dared to send. He has just received a small American booklet titled Constitution of the United States, a gift from one of the guards. At first, he opens it with disdain, but as he reads the first line, "We the people," he stops. Those 3 words, the very foundation he once mocked, begin to echo louder than any military anthem. He writes in his diary, "They do not build empires, they build participation." Around him, the new Germany begins to stir. Berlin, shattered and divided, flickers with electric light once more. Children attend schools rebuilt with American funds. Newspapers reopen under editors who once feared censorship. The Marshall Plan has turned from promise to presence, 1,500 factories restored, 3,000 kilometers of railway repaired, 12 million tons of food distributed. Released from captivity, Reinhardt visits the capital. Standing before a new government building, he sees a sign Federal Republic of Germany established May 23, 1949. His hand trembles as he touches the newsprint. "We thought democracy was chaos," he whispers. "But look, order born from mercy." Around him, workers raise scaffolds, streetcars clang again, and laughter returns to city corners once haunted by despair. Some of the former officers meet quietly in cafes, unsure how to speak of what they've witnessed. They share fragments of the American library in camp, the guard who lent them Steinbeck novels, the day they debated freedom instead of strategy. Slowly, they begin to see their own defeat, not as humiliation, but as education. Von Kleist writes to Reinhardt, "The enemy taught us the meaning of responsibility. Freedom is not the absence of order, it is the presence of conscience." Outside, a train whistles through the ruins, carrying crates of wheat stamped with the words, "Gift of the American people." No one cheers, yet everyone watches. The sound of that train's steady, rhythmic, persistent, becomes the soundtrack of a nation relearning how to stand. Viewers, consider this. Can mercy ever win where bullets fail? Can a nation rebuild another not with chains, but with choices? Tell me what you think, because history, at its best, is not a monument, it's a conversation. Berlin, 1952. The snow falls lightly on the reconstructed streets where rubble once stood shoulder high. Shop windows gleam again. Children run between trams, their laughter echoing against new facades built from the very bricks salvaged from ruins. Inside a narrow apartment overlooking Alexanderplatz, an old man sits by the window, General von Kleist, his uniform long gone, replaced by a wool coat worn at the elbows. Outside, a convoy passes by trucks draped with the stars and stripes, carrying boxes labeled Care Package USA. He hears the same engine hum that once marked conquest, but now it carries warmth. His grandson, a boy of 6, presses his nose to the frosted glass. "Opa, who are they?" he asks. Von Kleist pauses, eyes reflecting the moving flags. "They're what we used to laugh at," he says quietly. "Democracy." He stands slowly, leaning on his cane, and raises his hand in salute as the convoy disappears into the fog. There is no music, no applause, only the faint clatter of wheels fading down the street. Yet in that small motion, every contradiction of his life dissolves. In those years, democracy is not yet perfect. The Cold War divides the world again. Fear lingers, and many wounds remain open. But something irreversible has happened inside men like Kleist and Reinhardt, the shift from contempt to comprehension. Reinhardt, now working as a teacher in Cologne, lectures his students about civic duty, the greatest discipline, he tells them, is to govern oneself. His students, too young to remember the war, listen in quiet awe, unaware that their teacher once laughed at such words behind barbed wire. Across the Atlantic, a senator reading reports from Germany notes that former POWs are volunteering for local councils, churches, even democratic parties. Out of 5 million repatriated prisoners, thousands now help build the very institutions they once despised. History, it seems, has turned its sharpest weapon into a seed. The transformation remains invisible to most. No parades mark it. No medals are given. Yet this quiet triumph reshapes the century. The men who once commanded tanks now plant vineyards. Those who swore by the Reich now defend constitutions. Their laughter, once cruel, mocking, certain has softened into gratitude. As dusk settles, von Kleist writes his final letter before sleep. Empires fall by force. Democracies rise by forgiveness. I have seen both. He folds the page, places it beside the window, and watches the reflection of the American flag flutter once more in the glass before the snow covers it. The room grows dim. The war at last is over. History rarely ends with trumpets. More often, it fades into the quiet rhythm of ordinary lives, a farmer repairing his gate, a teacher closing his book, a grandfather watching the dusk settle over a rebuilt city. The story of the German commanders who once scoffed at democracy is not just about ideology or war. It is about the long, invisible process of unlearning arrogance and rediscovering humanity. What began as contempt behind Texas fences became revelation among Europe's ruins. They had entered captivity believing democracy was chaos, a circus of weak men voting themselves comfort. Yet, in America's factories, they saw something no doctrine could explain: discipline born from freedom, cooperation without fear, unity without uniformity. They saw women welding ships, farmers donating crops, workers striking deals through argument, not decree. It confused them first, then shamed them, and finally quietly converted them. When those same men stepped off the ships back in Germany, they no longer carried the certainty of the old empire. They carried something heavier: understanding. They had seen a nation powerful enough to win without cruelty and merciful enough to feed its enemies. They had watched democracy earn each sunrise rather than demand eternity. And they realized that the power they once worshipped was small beside the patience of those who choose to rebuild instead of rule. Decades later, when the lights of Berlin shone again, the laughter that once mocked freedom had become its echo. The transformation of these commanders was not recorded in parades or speeches, but in gestures: a handshake between former foes, a rebuilt bridge, a letter written to a student. Each act whispered the same truth: that the strength of a nation lies not in the fear it commands, but in the hope it inspires. Empires rise through conquest, but they endure only through conscience. Democracy, fragile yet relentless, does not seek to dominate, it seeks to understand. And perhaps that is why it survives. Because long after the battles end, forgiveness is the only victory that still matters.